What if the boats that could choke off 20% of the world's oil are sitting inside a mountain right now, waiting for one radio call? That is not a rumor. It is confirmed by the United States military itself. Before I show you exactly how we know, hit like on this video, tap subscribe, and share it with someone who still thinks this war ended months ago, because it did not. Let's rewind, because most people watching this jumped in halfway through the story. And without the full picture, nothing that happened this summer makes sense. In late February of this year, the United States and Israel launched a joint strike on Iran that shook the entire region. Iran's supreme leader was killed in that opening attack, along with several top commanders. Iran called it an act of war. Washington and Israel called it a strike to stop something worse before it could happen. Within hours, missiles were flying both ways. Within days, this had become the largest open conflict the Middle East had seen in decades. Almost immediately, Iran did something that sent shockwaves through the global economy. It moved to shut the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow stretch of water between Iran and Oman that roughly a quarter of the world's oil and a fifth of its liquefied natural gas passes through every single day. Iranian forces issued warnings against ships trying to pass, then started boarding vessels, attacking tankers and laying sea mines in the water. Shipping companies panicked. Insurance costs on tankers heading toward the Gulf spiked overnight. Within weeks, more than a dozen merchant ships had been damaged, some abandoned entirely, and sailors had been killed just trying to move cargo through a waterway that had stayed open through wars, revolutions, and decades of tension before this one. For the first time in a generation, one of the most important choke points on the planet was genuinely, seriously closed. Here's the part that matters for today's story. In the weeks right after that first strike, American and Israeli air power went straight after Iran's navy. Ports were hit, bases were hit, ships were sunk before they ever left the harbor. If you looked at satellite photos from March, you would have thought Iran's ability to fight at sea was finished. It was not. And the reason why is the whole point of this video. Iran figured out decades ago that it could never build a navy strong enough to fight the United States ship for ship. Aircraft carriers, destroyers, that kind of firepower was never a fight Iran could win, and its military planners knew it early. So instead of copying American power, they built something completely different. Thousands of small, fast, cheap attack boats. Boats that cost almost nothing next to a warship. Boats that can carry missiles or torpedoes. Boats that are hard to spot, harder to track, and easy to replace the moment one is lost. This is not a new idea for Iran, by the way. It goes back decades to the war Iran fought with Iraq in the 1980s, when Iranian forces first realized that small, fast boats could harass and even damage much larger warships if they used speed and numbers instead of size and armor. That lesson never left Iranian military doctrine. Every year since, Iran poured resources into refining it, running drills, building more boats, and studying how to protect them from the exact kind of air power the United States eventually brought against them this year. And here's the part that should genuinely impress you, even if you have never cared about military strategy in your life. Iran did not just build these boats. It built homes for them. Along the rocky southern coast and on a handful of small islands sitting right inside the Strait of Hormuz, Iranian engineers spent years carving tunnels straight into the mountains. Real hidden harbors cut into solid rock, where these fast boats could sit safe, refuel, rearm, and launch again within minutes of an order coming through. From a plane, from a satellite, from a warship's radar, all you see is empty coastline. Rock and cliffs, nothing else. Then a hidden door opens, and boats pour out toward the shipping lanes before anyone has time to react. That single design choice explains something that has confused a lot of people watching this war from the outside. Months after the US wiped out most of Iran's visible navy, officials were still calling Iranian fast boats an active threat to global shipping, because the ships you can see from space were never the ones that mattered most. The ones tucked inside the mountain were always the real problem. Now, let's talk about what has actually happened in just the last several weeks, because this is where the title of this video comes from, and I want to walk you through it carefully. There's a real difference between what is confirmed and what people online are exaggerating for clicks. In mid-July, after Iranian forces struck several commercial ships near Oman, U.S. Central Command launched a massive response. Public statements confirmed American forces hit dozens of targets across southern Iran in a single night. Air defense systems, command centers, coastal radar, anti-ship missile sites, and small boats, some of them using American sea drones for the very first time in this war. Locations named directly in official statements included Bandar Abbas, Greater Thumb Island, Bushehr, Chabahar, and Konarak. These are the exact places analysts have pointed to for years as the backbone of Iran's hidden coastal network. That was not a one-time event. Strikes continued for several consecutive nights through the middle of July, each one described by American officials as larger than the one before it. Central Command said its forces struck Iranian coastal defense systems, missile and drone sites, and what it called maritime capabilities, aimed specifically at reducing Iran's ability to threaten ships moving through the strait. Iranian state media reported explosions across multiple southern provinces on the same nights. On the diplomatic side, tension kept climbing. The United States reimposed a full naval blockade on Iranian ports in the middle of this stretch, and oil prices jumped hard the day that announcement went out. So, if you are sitting here thinking, wait, didn't they already destroy most of Iran's navy back in March? You are right to be confused, and that confusion is exactly why this story deserves more than a 5-second headline. The big, visible ships were mostly dealt with early in the war. What has kept dragging on, strike after strike, month after month, is this much harder problem. Reaching boats that are not sitting in open water where anyone can see them, but hidden inside carved-out rock, sometimes behind reinforced doors, sometimes with more than one hidden exit, built on purpose to survive exactly the kind of bombing campaign that has been running against them for months. If stories like this one are exactly why you keep coming back to this channel, do me a quick favor, ring the notification bell after you subscribe, because this conflict is still moving right now, and I refuse to let you miss the next major update by accident. Let's talk about why these hideouts have been so brutally hard to fully shut down. Because this is genuinely one of the toughest problems in modern warfare, and once you understand it, you will see every future headline about this war differently. Picture solid rock, sometimes hundreds of meters thick, sitting between a bomb and its target. That is not a wall that collapses the way a building does. That is natural armor the planet built over millions of years, and no amount of modern engineering makes punching through that simple. To actually destroy a facility like this, you need specialized bunker-busting weapons designed to bury deep before they detonate. Reports from earlier this year confirmed American aircraft dropping 5,000-pound bunker-buster bombs on hardened Iranian missile sites along the strait, alongside operations that sank more than a dozen Iranian mine layers caught trying to seed the water with explosives. That kind of weapon exists specifically because normal bombs bounce off mountains. But even bunker busters need extremely precise intelligence on where the internal chambers actually sit. If you only crater the entrance without touching, what is inside? The boats are still sitting there safe, ready to roll out again the moment repairs are finished. And if a base has multiple entrances, which many of these do by design, sealing one doorway does not mean the facility is finished. It might just mean the boats leave from a different opening a few days later. This is the entire logic behind why Iran built these bases inside mountains instead of simple boat sheds on an open beach. A boat shed gets flattened in a single pass. A mountain does not. Iran's planners understood that a bombing campaign against hardened, hidden, spread out infrastructure becomes slow, expensive, and exhausting for whoever is trying to shut it down, even for a military with total control of the sky. And that is exactly what has been playing out for months. Strike after strike, week after week, against a threat that keeps surviving simply because of where it chose to hide. There is a tactic that makes these small boats especially dangerous the moment they do come out, and it is worth understanding, because it explains why the US and its allies take this threat so seriously, even though each individual boat looks tiny next to a warship. It is called swarming. Instead of one boat trying to fight a destroyer head-on, which it would lose badly, and immediately, dozens of small boats launch from scattered hidden locations at the same time and converge on a single target from multiple directions at once. Some carry missiles, some carry torpedoes. The goal is not a fair fight. The goal is to overwhelm a ship's defenses. Through sheer numbers, coming from angles, a crew cannot watch all at once. Footage from years before this war even started shows Iranian fast boats rehearsing exactly this kind of formation near a US destroyer, closing distance from several directions while warnings went out over the radio. That was never a theoretical threat. It was always a rehearsed one, practiced for years before it was ever used for real. Think about what that actually means for a ship's crew sitting in the middle of the strait right now. A warship's radar and defense? Systems are built to track incoming missiles and aircraft coming from predictable directions, often from far away, giving crews time to react. A swarm of small boats does the opposite. They are low, fast, cheap, and they come from close range, from multiple bearings at once, sometimes mixed in with ordinary fishing traffic that makes it genuinely hard to tell threat from civilian boat until the last possible second. That single design problem is a huge part of why the United States has spent months bombing the coastline instead of simply sailing warships through and calling the strait open. It is not that American forces cannot fight these boats. It is that fighting them at the moment they emerge, scattered, fast, and numerous, is far riskier and far messier than destroying as many of them as possible before they ever leave the rock they are hiding inside. Now, I want to be straight with you about something, because a lot of coverage online right now is stretching what is actually confirmed. And I would rather you hear the accurate version from me than get excited about a headline that is not quite true. What is confirmed from Central Command's own public statements and from multiple independent reports is that American forces have repeatedly and heavily struck the military infrastructure surrounding these coastal hideouts. Missile sites, radar command centers, boats caught out in the open, dozens of confirmed fast attack craft destroyed in a single wave of strikes according to official numbers. What has not been confirmed anywhere, not by Central Command, not by any serious independent reporting, is a specific claim that American forces have actually breached or collapsed the hardened tunnel systems themselves, the deep carved-out rock where boats shelter inside the mountain. That distinction matters. Hitting the coastline around these hideouts hard is very real and very documented. Claiming the underground bunkers have been cracked open completely is a much bigger claim, and right now the public record simply does not support it. If you see someone stating that with total confidence, treat it with real skepticism until more than one credible source confirms it. It is also worth understanding why this specific gap, hitting the coastline hard but not confirming a breach of the tunnels themselves, keeps repeating itself strike after strike. Verifying damage deep inside a mountain is nothing like verifying damage to a building. You cannot simply look at a satellite photo and see a collapsed chamber sitting under solid rock. Analysts have to piece together indirect evidence instead. Things like whether boat traffic still comes and goes from a known entrance, whether Iran keeps rebuilding damaged surface structures around a site, whether independent satellite imagery shows fresh construction equipment near a suspected bunker weeks after a strike was claimed to have destroyed it. That kind of evidence takes time to gather and confirm properly, which is exactly why careful reporting tends to lag behind the loudest claims online. Speed and accuracy rarely move at the same pace in a story like this one. And if a channel is telling you otherwise, they're probably choosing speed. There's also a human cost to all of this that is easy to lose track of when you are only watching strike footage and reading numbers off a screen. This is not happening in some empty military zone far from ordinary life. These coastal areas have towns, workers, families living nearby. Reports coming out of Iran describe civilian harm from these waves of strikes, including people with no connection at all to military operations. An Iranian security guard killed at a water pumping station being one confirmed example, along with damage to commercial vessels and their crews caught in the middle of this fight. That does not erase the military importance of these targets. It just means this story is not purely a hardware story, and it should never be treated like one. If this kind of honest, no exaggeration breakdown is what you actually come here for, do something for me right now before we keep going. Type the word coastline in the comments, just that one word, so I can see how many of you are still watching this far in, because it genuinely tells me what kind of videos to keep making. Let's zoom out, because there is a bigger piece of this puzzle that a lot of people completely miss. Strikes are only half the pressure campaign running against Iran right now. The other half is a naval blockade, and honestly, it might matter even more in the long run than any single night of bombing. Since the United States reimposed its blockade on Iranian ports, the economic damage has been severe. Oil prices spiked hard the day the announcement was made. And reporting since then has described billions of dollars in lost revenue draining out of an economy that was already strained from years of sanctions before this war even started. Some ships have been intercepted. Some have been seized outright. A few have still managed to slip through because no blockade is ever fully airtight. But the overall bleeding has been steady and real. Meanwhile, other Gulf producers have quietly adapted. Saudi Arabia has shifted much larger volumes of oil through its Red Sea ports, specifically to route around the danger sitting inside the strait, a workaround that would have been unthinkable at this scale before the war began. Reporting has described Saudi Red Sea exports climbing from roughly 100,000 barrels a day before the war to well over 3 million barrels a day now, which tells you just how seriously the entire region has reorganized itself around the assumption that Hormuz is not fully safe and might not be for a while. And this is not just a Middle East story sitting far away from your own life. Every driver filling up a gas tank, every country importing fuel, every business that depends on shipping costs staying predictable has felt some version of this ripple. When one of the world's busiest oil corridors becomes even partly unreliable, prices do not stay isolated to the region where the fighting is happening. They move through global markets within days, which is part of why world leaders far outside the Middle East have been watching this specific stretch of coastline as closely as anyone actually living near it. So picture the full situation Iran has been living inside for months. Direct military strikes hammering its coastline and its hidden boat network on one side. A massive economic chokehold slowly draining its resources on the other. Two pressure campaigns running at the same time, clearly designed to work together toward the same outcome, ending Iran's ability to threaten one of the most important waterways on the planet. And here is the twist that makes this whole story far more interesting than a simple good guys, bad guys headline. Destroying most of Iran's visible navy in the opening weeks of this war did not stop Iran from continuing to threaten the Strait of Hormuz afterward. Analysts who have tracked this conflict closely have pointed out that Iran's large conventional ships were never really the core of the threat to begin with. The real disruptive power was always sitting inside those hidden coastal bunkers in boats too small and too well hidden to easily erase from the air, which means sinking the expensive, visible warships back in the spring, as dramatic as it looked on camera at the time, barely touched the actual capability that has kept this fight dragging on for months since. There is one more layer worth understanding before we get to what all of this actually means, because it connects directly to everything we have just walked through. Iran has not only been protecting fast boats inside these coastal bases, there's also serious mine-laying capability tied up in the same infrastructure, and mines are a genuinely underrated threat in naval warfare. Unlike a missile, a mine does not need a crew standing by or continuous guidance. It can sit quietly in a shipping lane for weeks, waiting for the wrong ship to pass over it. Clearing mines safely is slow, careful, dangerous work, and it becomes even more dangerous when the water you're trying to clear is defended by hidden fast boats capable of swarming in from several directions at once. Even in a scenario where the fighting stopped completely tomorrow, that lingering underwater threat would not simply disappear. It would take real time, real risk, and real resources to fully clear. Here is where things stand as of right now, and this is the part most coverage skips entirely because it is less dramatic than another explosion. Alongside the strikes, there has been genuine diplomatic movement happening in the background. Reports describe the United States pulling back from at least one planned larger bombing campaign to leave more room for negotiations. And officials on both sides have described talks reaching later stages even while military pressure continued. Inside Iran's own government, there appears to be a real split. Some officials are pushing hard for a negotiated end to this, mainly because of the economic damage piling up. Others, particularly within Iran's military establishment, are pushing to hold the line, betting that Iran can simply outlast American patience the way it has survived pressure campaigns before. The tension between the two sides inside Iran may end up shaping how this war actually ends more than any single strike does. On at least a few occasions now, reports indicate the United States has planned a much larger bombing campaign against Iran, and then pulled back at the last moment to give negotiators more room to work, a pattern that suggests both sides understand just how much worse this could still get if diplomacy fails completely. That kind of restraint rarely makes headlines the way an explosion does, but it may end up mattering just as much to how this entire story eventually closes. So where does this honestly leave us? Strip away the dramatic headlines, and here's the real picture. Iran spent roughly 2 decades building a defensive system specifically designed to survive exactly the kind of overwhelming air campaign it is facing right now. Hidden fast boats tucked inside hardened coastal caves, a doctrine built entirely around one idea. You do not need to win a fair fight against a bigger military. You just need to make sure that military can never fully finish the job. And months into one of the most intense bombing campaigns this region has seen in a generation, with dozens of confirmed strikes hitting this coastline again and again, that system is still functioning. Not untouched, not unscathed, genuinely damaged with confirmed destruction of dozens of boats and major infrastructure, but not eliminated either. That is not a clean, satisfying ending, and I know that. There's no single dramatic moment here where you can point and say, that's it, it's over, one side clearly won. What we are actually watching is something slower and honestly more historically realistic. Sustained pressure against infrastructure that was built on purpose to be brutally hard to destroy completely. And if history is any guide, wars built around this kind of asymmetry rarely end with one perfect knockout strike. They tend to wind down slowly, through some mix of exhaustion, economic pressure, and quiet diplomatic movement happening behind the scenes while the strikes keep making the headlines out front. And maybe that is the real lesson sitting underneath this entire story. It was never really about boats or caves or bombs at all, not at its core. It is about what happens when a smaller power refuses to fight the fight everyone expects it to fight, and instead builds something patient and hidden, something designed to outlast the headlines rather than win one dramatic battle. Whether you see that as brilliant engineering or something far darker probably depends on which side of this war you are watching it from. But either way, understanding it is the difference between actually knowing what is happening in the Strait of Hormuz right now and just reacting to whatever title happens to trend today. I will keep tracking this one closely because it is not finished, not even close. The moment there is something new and properly confirmed, a real breach of those hardened bunkers, a genuine diplomatic breakthrough, anything that changes this picture, I will bring it to you straight, sourced properly, without the exaggeration everyone else is selling you. Until then, stay sharp and stay skeptical of anyone online promising you an instant, total victory. Wars built inside mountains do not end that way. They end the way most patient, hidden things end, slowly, quietly, and usually far away from the cameras that made them famous in the first place. So the next time you see a headline claiming this war is over or claiming some hidden base was wiped out completely in a single night, remember everything we just walked through. Remember the rock. Remember the boats built to disappear the moment the bombing starts. And remember that the real story here was never about who fired the last missile. It was always about who could outlast the other, one strike, one blockade, one quiet negotiation at a time.